Vijay, Prashad is a tri-continental man. I never know which continent I'm going to find him on, and I don't know tonight either which continent he's on. That's because he is an intellectual colossus in the movement for liberation and for justice in the world. And wherever there is injustice, you'll find his pen and his magnificent brain analyzing it. I hope he's there now, wherever he is. Vijay, thank you very much for joining me. Where do I find you this evening?
Well, I'm on my way, George, and it's great to be with you. I'm on my way to Glasgow. So I don't know which train I'm going to take, and I'm very sorry to hear about those train accidents and the downed lines and so on. But I hesitate, but yet I shall say it, this might have something to do with the privatization of rail in the United Kingdom. Typically, when one sees this happen, there's underfunding of infrastructure and so on, and it leads to a loss of life. But I'll be with you in Glasgow very soon.
Well, God willing, and I hope you survive the infestation of rats that I spoke about earlier. There's some two-legged rats going to be there also, Vijay, so keep your eyes open for them. And watch you don't get run over by Joe Biden's 80-car cavalcade. And, of course, don't go in the lavatory right after him. Now, Vijay, serious matters. Do you agree with my analysis that Patrice Lumumba was the greatest of all African leaders, or certainly would have become so if imperialism had not overthrown him?
You see, George, the continent of Africa has never been given a chance in the modern period to set its own clock to its own time. Sovereignty has been denied to that continent. Let's go before Patrice Lumumba. The real originator of the independence and sovereignty of Africa were the people of Ghana. Leading them, of course, was Kwame Nkrumah, another leader, close friend of Patrice Lumumba. In fact, Patrice Lumumba of the Congo considered Kwame Nkrumah as his mentor, as his leader. Nkrumah was overthrown in a bloody coup in Ghana. Of course, the coup against Lumumba was terrible. This is, as you said, one of the most important, significant countries on the continent of Africa. And then three and a half decades later, our very great leader, Thomas Sankara, picks up the mantle from Kwame Nkrumah, picks up the mantle from Patrice Lumumba. You know, Mr. Sankara led a country which was called Upper Volta, and he decided that as part of the ability to produce dignity among his people, he changed the name of Upper Volta, a ridiculous colonial name. He changed it to Burkina Faso, which means land of upright people. In a way, Patrice Lumumba was trying to create a land of upright people, and they were not allowed. He was murdered not only by the Congolese elites and others who didn't like him, but specifically by the Belgians, Belgian colonialism, assisted by the US colonials and by the British intelligence services. There's a very significant British intelligence officer, Daphne Park. She said later in her life that, yes, we were involved. We helped do it. It's a crime against humanity because ever since then, George, Congo has never been able to stand up to be what it could be. In other words, the heart, central focus of Africa. The West did 3 coups, George, in 3 different countries around the same time to cut down the ability of these continents to rise up. The coup against Congo in 1961, the coup against Brazil in 1964, and the coup against Indonesia in 1965. Each of the main continents of the global South faced a major coup d'etat led by the West to prevent these continents, not only these countries, from standing up against imperialism.
And not to mention the overthrow of the democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran not many years before that. It's trite almost. It was that these leaders could not be trusted to govern their countries in the interests of the powerful Western countries. Isn't that so?
Let's stay with the Congo for a minute, George, because people don't talk about what was at the heart of this. Do you know that the Congo was seen as the principal producer of what the CIA called industrial diamonds? Industrial diamonds, George, is a code word for uranium. The uranium used in the two atom bombs that were exploded at Hiroshima and Nagasaki came from the Congo, from one particular mine in the Congo. Right up to the late 1960s, the West, particularly the United States, worried deeply that if they didn't secure Congolese uranium, then the Soviets would get their hands on it. The Congo produced some of the highest grade of uranium. There was a real problem in the US government because they pledged to buy uranium from Canada, but if they actually took the Canadian offer at hand, they'd have to neglect buying the Congolese uranium. They didn't want to do that. They wanted control of all uranium sources. And until the Congo won its independence in 1960-61, the uranium that arrived in the United States was invoiced as Belgian uranium. Belgium doesn't have any uranium. It's like talking about Brazzaville's diamonds. There are no diamonds in Brazzaville. That was diamonds from the Congo that used to be smuggled in collusion with the French into Brazzaville across the river from what was then Leopoldsville and would be sold as Brazzaville diamonds. No, there is no Belgian uranium. It was from the Congo. And it was uranium that just fixed the mind of the CIA, fixed the mind of British intelligence. They just didn't want the Soviets to get involved with being able to access, not only control, but access the uranium from the Congo. It was uranium in the Congo. It was oil in Brazil. João Goulart, who was overthrown in the coup in 1964, was moving ahead to nationalize the oil. What the United States and British intelligence just didn't want to see happen in Brazil was for this very large country, the largest country in South America, to provide an example to other countries that you could nationalize key sectors of the economy. Kwame Nkrumah was doing something unforgivable. He refused to merely produce cacao, the raw material for chocolate. He refused. He said, Ghana will not forever be producing the raw material for chocolate. We want to advance. We want to create aluminum, not just sell bauxite. We want to process our own goods. We want to industrialize. All of that is unacceptable. And I must say, when you read the record in the CIA archive, you get the most racist kind of language talking about how these people are still in the trees, they can't be seen to walk on the land and so on. You get a British intelligence officer, P.B. Whitstanley, writing about Brazil, saying, well, their development can only go so far as their mulattoes can handle. This is the racist colonial attitude, but it's rooted, George, in the fact that there are precious raw materials that the West thought was their patrimony. Nobody else could access it.
And of course, in the case of Congo, they had to, it was not credible to go back to Belgian direct rule. So they had to find a credible patsy to pretend to be the decision maker, the president, and they found the army officer, Mobutu Sese Seko, who went on actually to perhaps be the biggest thief of the 20th century. He stole literally billions of dollars from this exceedingly rich country of the Congo. How did he manage to stay in power so long, Vijay?
Well, Mobutu, or Joseph Mobutu as he was before, was a very smart man because he insinuated himself in the 1950s into the ranks both of Belgian intelligence and of the CIA. And on top of all that, George, he was a very close personal advisor to Lumumba. Lumumba trusted him. At one point, when Lumumba became prime minister, Mobutu was removed from control of the army and he complained, and Lumumba, in a very teary moment, brought him back in. I mean, one of the problem with people like Lumumba and so on is we are softies, we are sentimentalists. People of the left are sentimentalists. He
Not
somehow
me, Vijay. Not me.
Not you. Well, maybe not you, George, but there's too many examples of this that we see. Mobutu comes to power eventually after Lumumba is captured and then brutally murdered. Brutally murdered. I mean, his body is dissolved in acid and so on. The first strategy with the Congo was to break the Congo up with a series of secession movements in Katanga and South Kasai and so on. That was not necessary once Lumumba was overthrown. Mobutu arrives as the strong man in the same way as Suharto was the strong man in Indonesia, and the Western intelligence services fully backed them. British intelligence, George, plays a key role in all of these because what British intelligence does, and let me just be very frank with you, what the British Broadcasting Corporation does, the BBC, is it provides a kind of intellectual cover for these dictatorships. The BBC has a long history of collaborating one way or the other with British intelligence to basically do an information operation, and kind of psych ops, to say, well, actually, there was Lumumba was getting too close to the Soviets, so he was doing his own coup. Or in Indonesia, they accused the left, the communist left, of attempting a coup, and therefore and trying to go after the military and justifying the military crackdown, including the murder of millions of communists. There was, as I said, a British intelligence involvement in Indonesia in that coup of 1965. The British were very worried that the government of Mr. Sukarno was going to challenge British base in Singapore. You see, the British relied on Singapore. Singapore and Malaysia had just divided. Lee Kuan Yew became the premier of Singapore. A very large part of Singapore's governance was dominated by the British Foreign Office. There was a base there. The British saw the Straits of Malacca essentially as their sea. And Indonesia was going to challenge this. So from Singapore, there was a British, intelligence base set up. Mr. Wynne was the British intelligence officer, and they were producing these newsletters in the build-up to the coup, which were basically filled with false information about what the communists were threatening to do. And they built up support among the Australians. The Australians played a key role in the coup and murder in Indonesia in 1965. The Australians were faxing in the old days of, actually, I think they may have been telex machines. They were sending by telex lists of names of people that should be eliminated. In fact, Jeffrey Robinson, whose book you just showed, had a previous book on Bali, the paradise of Bali. That book was called The Other Side of Paradise, in which Robinson details how information was coming from Western intelligence services, quite granular detail of which people to pick up and who to kill. We haven't really, I think, as a planet, come to terms with what these coups, the coup in Congo, the coup in Brazil, and the coup in Indonesia meant. We haven't really come to terms, George.
Well, the better for hearing from you tonight about it, and let's hope it encourages wider reading on these matters. Good luck on your journey to Glasgow. Stay safe. Vijay Prashad, thank you for coming on the mother of all talk shows.